This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast about all things innovation in the people space. I'm Kyle Roed. Let's start the show. Welcome back, Rebel HR listeners. This is going to be a fun one. With us today, we have John Bernatovicz. John is the founder of an organization called Willery, which is a staffing and consulting firm for HR and payroll professionals, amongst a number of other services. He is also the author of an awesome book that I encourage you to check out, HR Like a Boss. It is currently available in bookstores all around the country. And with us, we also have Molly Burdess. John, welcome to the podcast.
Kyle, thank you very much. Congrats on a correct pronunciation of my last name. That's a first, I have to say, on a podcast. It has been butchered. I can tell you at a later date the funniest pronunciation that ever happened when I was a very young kid playing in a golf tournament. And Molly, I really appreciate your time as well. I can't wait to talk all things innovation, HR like a boss, whatever other topics you dig into.
Yeah,
well,
let's go.
Super excited about it. I was really worried about pronouncing John, but I figured it out. So, progress. Podcast
Usually the way it goes. Usually the way it goes.
Well, John, thank you so much. And I also want to thank you. I had the opportunity to be a guest on John's show as well. So really excited that we convinced you to return the favor here. I want to talk about a couple different things. You've got a varied background. You've been, you got your expertise in with ADP, and you've done some work in the HR world for quite a while. So I'm curious, what prompted you to write a book about human resources?
Couple things. Number one, I was inspired by my parents. My parents, unfortunately, both passed away in about a 13-month span of 2019 to 2020. And my dad was an executive CEO for 30 years. And I got to ride his coattails a bit and learn from the experiences that I saw him lead a 1,200 employee regional hospital system in our community. And then my mom was a macrobiotic diet, didn't believe in medicine artist who actually, I know it's a podcast, can't see the painting behind me, but she was a watercolor artist. And when they passed away, I, like many, as I've heard, went through the grieving process. And one of the things that came out of the other end of it was, what have I not done in my life that I want to make sure that I accomplish? And this write a book thing had gnawed at me because I have some friends in the HR space, Chris Dunn, Tim Sackett, Ben Eubank, Steve Brown, who all had written books. And I met them. I've hung out with them. I've broken bread with them. And I said, they're not that much different than me. They just had the courage and inspiration to write a book. And so anyway, I started writing this book that is not HR Like a Boss. And my marketing director and I were talking about the progress of me writing this book after I had that inspiration. And I was struggling to write. And she said, do you remember that presentation you did in 2018 at Kent State, my alma mater? And I ultimately did it at a regional HR conference called HR Like a Boss. She said, maybe you could start writing that book or pivot to writing on that content, because we already have an outline for it. It was well received by the HR community, and PS, it probably would do good for our brand as a staffing and consulting firm in HR and payroll. And I immediately pivoted that, and it started flowing. HR Like a Boss started coming out of me in I'll call it the written form. And the coolest part for me is I actually hated reading books when I was younger. Actually almost 2 years ago, younger and back. If I go back to my early years, I did okay in school simply because I was one of those students that showed up and paid attention and sat in the front of the class. I guess you could call me a nerd. I did wear glasses as well at that time, but I just paid attention to what the lecturer or the teacher said. And ultimately, I had this moment where I need to get past this. I need to learn how to consume content in that regard. So I actually found a really cool audio platform to buy books, and I bought 100 books over the last 2+ years while I was writing my book. And long story short, the outline was there. And I read one of the books I read was Atomic Habits. I think Kyle and I talked about that on our podcast, and it taught me to pair a new habit with an existing habit. And so every morning, Saturday and Sunday for about a year, while my kids and wife were still enjoying a sleepful morning, I got up and tried to power through 1,000 words every weekend. That was my goal. If I can get 1,000 words every weekend for a year, I'll get 50,000 words. And lo and behold, ended up getting to 70,000. And the publisher from Sherm Books said that's a healthy, substantial HR book. And that's my story on how I got to it. The last thing I'll add on that, Kyle and Molly, is I really study HR from a business perspective. I look at it not as a practitioner at times, because I don't practice HR every single day. I'm blessed to have people inside of my team that do that at the same time are my customer as human resources. And I see a tremendous opportunity, almost a responsibility for HR to elevate its game, to do it in an amazingly awesome way that's like a boss. And the reason for it is our communities need it, and our employees and leaders need it. And the fact that there's such poor engagement level inside of organizations that you see from any survey that you get out, whether it's McKinsey telling us that or Gallup. And at the same time, I hate the figure that tells me 80 or 90% of employees don't think their employers care about them. Mm-hmm. That seems like a major whiff, swing and a miss with the bases loaded. And we got to do something about it. And I wrote the book with content in there as to how to try to shift that mindset of a human resource professional, just to do their job a little bit differently and a little bit better.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, you're really hitting on the reason why this podcast exists, because, I think there's a number of professionals in our seats that see the opportunity for HR to create that positive ripple within our organization, not by completely eliminating the things that we do, but by focusing on the way that we do our work. And so, I'm curious, the title is, I love the title. It's a great title. But, my thesis has always been, HR needs to step up to the plate, not just because we know HR, but because we know the organization, and step up as strategic leaders and be the sounding board for decisions related to people and talent and objectives, and be a little bit of the voice of reason and conscious within an organization. So is that the thesis that you wrote this book on, or kind of walk me through the titling and then kind of the overarching viewpoint of the book?
I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and my brother was a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. They called him the boss, and I thought he was a badass and just really loved his music. And I looked up to my brother. So anything my brother did, I did, and I liked. That was the first term that came to mind, that boss mentality that Bruce Springsteen has, and his way of not only just being the front man, but he has a huge E Street band. He's got this following of people. I saw him recently in concert, and he was still rocking at 70 plus years old. It was crazy to see. And he's been, I'll call it, resilient and flexible and evolving in his career on Broadway, and has his own show on Netflix, I think, or one of the streaming devices, besides just cranking out his love for music. That was the first thing that got me to the idea of boss. I then started seeing all these memes and GIFs, or whatever the words you use to describe those things on social media and the internet. And there's people doing this term like a boss. And then I got this idea to do a presentation called HR Like a Boss. And to Kyle's point, I don't know whether they like the content, they like the name. I had a sellout crowd at Kent State, I had a sellout crowd at the Pittsburgh HR conference, standing room only. And they didn't know who I was. They just liked the title, and maybe because there was some free credit they were getting. And then I felt inspired. I better come up with better be something to this name inside of this presentation, or inside of the book cover. And so really, HR Like a Boss is centered around loving what you do and taking ownership for your responsibilities, truly owning what you're responsible for and having a passion for it. And then there's 5 main sections of the book think differently, be different, be better, take action, make an impact. Those are the components of it. Inside of those sections, we then break down chapters that really drive what I'm hoping is more meaningful work for employees so they can improve their engagement level. We can drive, HR professionals can drive business results for the organization because that's what we do. We work for a company. They pay us money to drive results and not losing sight of that. And then if we do those things both really well, then why can't we do something good in our community that is needed, that our organization aligns to? And the last thing I'll say on the book, and I could talk forever about it because I've spent so much time studying it and rereading it, and that's an interesting exercise. But the money slide, the money chapter in the book is one around treating your job like a business. And inside of it, when you write a book, you have a lot of really bad ideas that when you write them down, you read them and you say to yourself, how quickly can I get that in an incinerator or a shredder so no one can ever consume that? And then every once in a while, you'll hit on something. And the money chapter, in my opinion, is chapter 14 of the book, which is treat your job like a business, where we break down 5 key elements to it. And the first element, they all have this rhyming convention or whatever the word is, PC, have a purposeful commitment, be people-centric, help your firm produce consistently, have process continuity, and understand the profitable components of your business. And inside of that chapter, it outlines how you can implement an HR like a boss plan to help your organization really get centered on what's most important and ensure your HR team is aligned to that purpose and the values and what you're trying to get accomplished. So that's HR like a boss in a nutshell, Kyle and Molly. Hopefully you want to buy the book now, or I'll send you a free copy with an autograph. Yes.
Absolutely. Can't wait. So to Kyle's point earlier about, really knowing the business, and I heard you kind of talk about that as well. I'm sure there's a lot of HR professionals that are like, oh, I'd love to know more about my business, what makes us profitable, who our customers are, but I'm not there yet. What advice do you have for them on where to start in that journey and how to get there?
Yeah, great question. And to me, it starts, if they're already inside the organization, it starts with building relationships with other colleagues. You can start within your own department because that's probably easiest, but then stepping outside of that, whether it's a cup of coffee or going to lunch or a coffee, a cup of coffee that you have with an individual in another department, and whether it's marketing, whether it's finance, whether it's IT, whether it's sales, and just as I hear you have a reputation, Molly, and having listened to the podcast, just ask really good questions. Be very inquisitive. And I had one of my guests on my podcast that I ended up putting in the book who talked about being consultative in your approach to your HR leadership and responsibility. And a consultant isn't there necessarily to do the work. Sometimes they're there to uncover what's going on, identify the gaps, and help the individual that they're consulting figure it out on their own and guide and direct them in that regard. And to me, HR can't do all the jobs, can't do sales, can't do the accounting close, can't do the information systems, but they can better understand what it is that needs to be done to do that job well so that they can support the leaders that have oversight of it. They can support the people that are doing it. And when it comes time for them to recruit and acquire and develop talent, they have a better understanding. What does it mean to do IT inside of our organization? So go buy one of those colleagues a cup of coffee, take them to Starbucks. People usually like that. And just rap with them. Just build a relationship with that individual and ask them a lot of questions about their work. And more than likely, they'll give you some nuggets that you'll learn along the way.
All right, Rebel HR community, I'm extremely excited to talk about one of my favorite events of the year. It is that time of the year for the Iowa SHRM State Conference. This year's theme is the Great Reset, the future of HR. The event's going to be in Des Moines, Iowa, October 11th through the 13th. I will be there, and I cannot wait to see all of you there. We're going to have a lot of fun as a Rebel HR community. It is a 2.5-day event. It will kick off with a pre-conference workshop with Tina Marie Woolfield entitled Wake Up HR and Get Curious. Sounds familiar, doesn't it, guys? Awesome live keynotes from Josh Evans and Sherry Harley, as well as amazing other speakers I cannot wait to listen to. I can also not wait to network and talk about how HR can change the world for the better and talk to all of you. You'll be able to get all the PDCs that you need, as well as some awesome vendor and sponsor exhibit hall prizes, and most importantly, some live networking opportunities. To learn more, go to www.iastateshermconference.org. That's www.iastateshrmconference.org. See you there, community. Rebel on. I'm not as smart as Molly in this regard. I learned the hard way where, I used to be very directive in my leadership capacity. Thou shalt do this because this is thy best practice. And, quickly came to realize that that's not exactly how you engage and inspire, an organization to adhere to, HR recommendations. It's about helping people discover it within themselves, helping them understand the compelling rationale behind it, and ultimately being trusted and being an advisor, because you don't have direct authority over much of the work you do. And, that's a challenge for many who struggle with people that just don't listen to them or don't agree.
Yeah. I think one of the key parts in that, and we talk about it in the book, is that's okay that you can't do that job, but there are elements of it that you can take ownership of. And one of them, to Molly's question, is just get to know the business, get to know the people that run it, understand what's important to them. And I don't know if in the book there's any major gotchas, or I don't want to describe it as new ideas, maybe framed a little bit differently. I've tried to run my business and operate in a executive level capacity and trying to make things as simple and as clear as possible. And don't miss the obvious. Building a relationship with someone in your IT department will benefit you in that you'll get to know them. You might make a new friend, and you'll have a new networking contact in your world that's a little different than you and their background. And then you'll understand what it is that they do every day, and you can help them in their job and ultimately recruit or develop professionals in that department better. It's a pretty simple formula, because then people, when you know what they're talking about, they're gravitating to you, as opposed to no one in HR knows what IT does. Why would we go to them? Or all of a sudden they're in a meeting. Oh no, why are they here? Where we want the opposite of, oh, hey, Molly, how you been? How are the kids? How's the dog you just got 2 months ago? How's whatever it is? And all of a sudden, when you start talking shop, you've completely put yourself on a level playing field with them, as opposed to you're in the principal's office. That was one of the things I heard several times in researching my book. I don't like being in HR because I feel like I'm the principal. Everybody hated the principal. And I said, well, that's true, but I also know some cool principals who treated me like a human being, not a subordinate or you're going to get in trouble kid when I was growing up. And I just think again, it goes back to that relationship building, the importance of getting to know people, asking good questions, being inquisitive and curious. It's simple stuff, but people don't make time for it because of a lot of different reasons. And maybe that's not what this show's about, but that's my take on it.
Absolutely. I think I love nothing more than to burst the bubble that I actually know more than just HR stuff, right? Like in my first career, my career was not, it didn't start in HR. It started in operations, and I used to do a little IT stuff. And then I kind of fell into HR just purely because, I like people, and I don't know, have Kyle go do it. Hey, Kyle, go hire 90 people. Right. Like, and that's, and so many of us have those stories, but it's like, I love the idea of like take ownership, right? Like, and treat your department like an organization, like the organization that it is. And also take ownership of the level of impact that you have in an org is massive, right? Like, and you are the expert. So if it's not you as the expert of all of the people function, then who is? Right. And the reality is the organizations need us to be that. And it starts with understanding the business, understanding the players, and giving sound advice. So I couldn't agree more.
One of the things on that, Kyle, that you mentioned that I've discovered over the years in owning a business is that there's a life there that exists in that company. And I've started 6 companies in my career. 3 of them 3 of them are no longer for various reasons. Sold one was an epic failure, one was just kind of washed out. And now I still have 3 companies. And they're like my 3 other children in my mind. And they have a living, breathing dynamic to them. And I believe that if, for example, in Willery, my mainstay business, the one I spend most of my time in, there's a dynamic there where people like Willery, the business. They like the concept of it. They like the culture, the people that make it up. There's an organicness to it. And I think sometimes that can be the opposite that can happen inside of an organization. I hate this company. Their glass door is bad. We treat our customers poorly. Our service is horrible. Our products get recalled or whatever. And then all of a sudden, the opposite of a good culture, of a good place to work, has this real feel to it as opposed to just a name on a sign. And I think as HR, we need to bring our business to life and understand what its characteristics are as a living, breathing thing, and then make the things that are really good amplified and make the things that are issues, address those head on, because more often than not, the reason why they're an issue, it has something to do with a person. It's not something that happened 15 years ago or something that's going to happen 15 years from now. It's the person leading that department. It's the interaction with customer service that's poor or good. And who's at the forefront of people is human resources. And so I really feel that way. And I think as an HR professional, if you look at your business as a living, breathing thing that we need to feed and care for, it needs to make money. A business, gets juice, its gasoline is profit. And how do we make sure we keep doing that day after day, week after week, year after year? So we have a business that's there to thrive and grow and do good in the community and do good for our employees, et cetera. That's something I've learned. And being in my seat, I'm required at times because people will ask for a raise, and all day long, I'd love to give out as much money as I possibly can. But then all of a sudden, Willery may not exist anymore if I don't manage the financials appropriately. And that's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times that comes down to just simple transparency. When I was kind of doing some research for this podcast, I'd heard you say in one of your podcasts that HR needs to be an advocate for our employees. But that can be also very challenging when you're stuck in the middle between, these employees that do want to raise, or they want to make more money, or they want more PTO, and you're trying to advocate for them, but you also have to balance the business need and that profitability. And that can be a very hard position to be in. What advice do you have for HR individuals who find themselves in the middle of that and are struggling with it?
Read the book called Never Split the Difference. It's a really great book. I'm forgetting the name of the author. Chris Voss is his name, Vass. Inside the book, it's really incredible, Molly and Kyle, in that he articulates how to deal with incredibly difficult negotiations. It was written by a former, I can't remember, CIA or FBI hostage negotiator who he was dealing with lives and really bad people on the other end, not necessarily a raise, a $5,000 raise. The stakes were incredibly high. And he called it tactical empathy. He ended up developing his ability to be empathetic to these terrorists. At the same time, he ended up having this negotiating style and directness about him that he was able to get to the end of job without people being harmed. And inside the book, it's an awesome book in that there's real life scenarios that he talks about that he had to negotiate, and then he applies them into negotiating with your children, negotiating with your spouse, negotiating with an employee. And there's just some really interesting tidbits inside of it of getting curious, mirroring what you hear, making sure people understand where you're coming from. And it's a balancing act. The negotiation is a balancing act. And the title gets me because as a salesperson at times, client will say, I don't want to pay that fee. I want to pay this. And I used to say, well, how about we meet in the middle? Now it's every once in a while. Well, here's why we need to consider that higher fee structure, et cetera. It's really powerful stuff. And I think, again, getting curious, building relationships, understanding where the person's coming from, and then helping them understand where we can as an organization create that balance between what you're looking for as an employee and what will continue to allow the business to be healthy.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Yeah, and I think us in HR, we have a huge opportunity to be more transparent with our employees as well and help them understand the bigger picture. I think if we don't have that transparency with them, often I find employees or just people in general, when they don't have the knowledge they need or information they need, they make up their own stories, right? And it's usually the worst. So if we can help them understand why decisions are made or why we do things the way we do, I think it can be very impactful on not only them, but their leaders and the organization as a whole.
Yeah, the authenticity is important. It goes back to what we talked about earlier. If you don't have a rapport with the person you're going into that salary negotiation with, all of a sudden you're just some person in HR that's fending for the company. Or you go into that negotiation, maybe you haven't dealt with that employee before, but you have a reputation as being approachable, as being real, as being genuine. And I think a lot of HR professionals that I've spoken with, they're concerned with, well, I know a lot of information. What can or can I not share? And I think I never forget an HR executive shared this sentiment with me that he felt some of the best HR professionals are the ones that can handle the information that they're exposed to and can then not use it in a way that is deterring people that are maybe not impacted by that information. So what people make or what happens behind the scenes when you have to do a termination or how people treat one another that maybe isn't, I'll call it public news. And I think in that sense, the ability for HR, again, to be able to be rational about what can I share, what can I not, and how do I ensure I get to end the job in whatever I'm doing that makes this better for the employee and makes it better for the business. And sometimes that can't be. But we can aspire and try and make every effort to do that. And to me, again, it goes back to treating people like you want to be treated, having a relationship with them, being smart about what you're talking about, like knowing your business, understanding it, having your data, having the insights, and just being genuine, being real, being, back to your point, Molly, transparent to the level that you can be, so that people don't think you're some robot or you're just a suit protecting the business.
Absolutely. And it's a real risk. It's look at any message board online and look at how they talk about HR. It might not be a fun exercise for an HR professional to understand, this is how people think about us. But all right. With that in mind, I think we're gonna leave it there. We're gonna switch gears. We're gonna go into the Rebel HR Flash Round. Are you ready?
I am. Yes.
All right. Here we go.
Get after it.
Question number 1: where does HR need to rebel?
Well, that's a crazy good question, and I know I should know the answer to that because you gave it to me before, Kyle, and I've heard on the podcast some of these questions. That the primary thing for me is from being rebelling in that regard is ensuring that you look at your business at the very highest level as to what is the purpose. Why does this business exist? If you look at, to me, the most successful people, they have real intention around what they're doing and they can answer the question, why are you doing that? And there's a consistent nature to it. I feel like sometimes businesses do not have that. And I that's not, to me, a mission. A mission is tactical. It's a beginning and an end. We're going to go do this. We're going to be the most powerful company in this area. We're going to win this dominance in this territory or in this region or in this country. I think a purpose is an intention. It's a why, and it's unachievable. And to me, HR should, in my opinion, and I'm very, I guess, My premise for saying this is based upon writing a book where I think the number one great idea out of it is have a purposeful commitment for your company and yourself. And I think sometimes people lose sight of the fact that there's some stuff going on around them that isn't that great in their community. And they overlook the potential that all those people that work at that business probably care about that thing that's happening in their community and can probably give time and maybe money to it. And so too can the business. And so I think that HR needs to understand how their business can make a difference and an impact in their community, and then learn from those nonprofits and community leaders that are impacted by that subject and figure out how their organization can help them. And my guess is people will gravitate to that, meaning employees will find that interesting. The business leaders will find it interesting. The community will certainly appreciate it. And I give my nephew a ton of props for this. Several years ago, he was looking at getting a job and he called me for career advice, and he hit me with a moment and I almost fell out of my chair. And he said, Uncle John, I don't want to work for a company that just makes a widget. I want to work for a company that makes a widget and does something good in the world. I'm like, boom. Why do you feel that way? And he answered my questions. And so net, find your company's purpose, be incredibly intentional and clear about it, align your leadership team around that purpose, and then get your employees, get your suppliers, get your customers all to understand why it is you're doing what you're doing. And my guess is the job of HR will be rebelling in a good way, because we'll be able to celebrate engaged employees, successful companies, and making a difference in the community.
Absolutely. Love it. All right. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
All right. I plugged them already. Steve Brown. Steve Brown's a great friend and wrote the foreword to my book. So I'll give him a plug for that. Made the intro to Sherm Books, the editor as well. So huge fan of Steve. I love Tim Sackett's work. Tim's a great disruptor and likes to innovate and poke the bear on Twitter, which I think is always fun. Say the same for Chris Dunn. Don't see Chris as much now that he got back into corporate HR. I think he's running talent acquisition for Marriott, but still involved in some of that work. And then probably the most popular person I've been recommending people to check out in HR is Ben Eubanks. Ben is, I'm not going to call him the godfather of AI and HR, but he's put his slant on the impact of artificial intelligence on human resources. He's been talking about it well before it became as trendy as it is today. And those are the 4 I would recommend that you check out. The last one in HR side, the last one that I've been working on or listening a lot about, unfortunately the author passed away. Trevor Noad, I think is how you pronounce his name. He wrote this book about getting to neutral. And basically, he's a performance coach. He worked with all the top end sports organizations, and Russell Wilson gives him all the praise for his success in Seattle and Super Bowl championship. And basically, Trevor wrote this book around, you can't go from negative to positive. So if you're in a really bad mood and somebody says to you, oh, just think positively, my guess is you probably want to punch him in the face. He says, get to neutral, which basically means just you don't have to get to positive, just get to neutral. His suggestion is to these sports athletes that are thinking something negatively, just don't say it out loud. Think it, that's fine. Think it, figure out why you're saying it, but don't say it out loud. And he wrote a couple really cool books and did a lot of work, and unfortunately passed away early in life from cancer. But his work is really profound as you're trying to navigate through life and challenges, et cetera.
Yeah. Side note, I think the whole the research on toxic positivity is really fascinating. Because we're all just kind of, especially in the Midwest, we're just smile through it, and it's not always great advice.
No.
Side note, we actually interviewed Steve on this podcast way back at episode 47. So yeah, feel free. We'll put that link in there if you want to check it out. HR on Fire is the name of that episode. It was a ton of fun, and absolutely one of my favorite human beings. So, and happens to be a great HR professional too. So couldn't agree more. So all right, last question. Thank you again for spending some time with us. Want to make sure that our audience can check out some of the work that you're doing, get exposed to some of that great content, get their hands on the book. How can our listeners connect with you and continue to learn?
Yeah, thanks. Website for the book and all things John Bernatovicz is hrlikeaboss.com, hrlikeaboss.com. My company's website is Willery.com, WILLORY.com. I give out my email to anyone so they can email me anytime. It's in my book. Actually, I saw that written by a couple authors. I thought that was cool. John at Willery.com. It's WILLORY.com. And John is JOHN. And I'm on social media. You can find me LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. If you can spell my last name, you can find me.
Perfect. Well, we will have all that in the show notes. So open up your podcast player, check it out. John, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Sincerely appreciate the time and what I am sure is an extremely busy schedule. And thanks as well for putting out some of this great content into the world of HR and for sharing some of your expertise with us today.
The same to you. Congratulations on the success of your podcast and kicking butt in HR. Keep it up. I love it.
Thanks, John. Thanks for joining, Molly.
Thanks.
All right. That does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.